Drug dealers, what's your craziest story from the industry? One of the wackiest stories I have involves when I was selling edibles. There was this guy who would Venmo me the money, and then I would drive through his college dorm parking lot, toss the goods out of the car, and move along without exchanging any words. He would always be there, wearing a hoodie and smoking cigarettes, waiting for me to roll through. Once, I mistakenly threw the packet to the wrong guy. He quickly drove off, but then I realized my mistake and went back later to give it to the correct person. Later, people in that dorm received an email describing my car's make and model, warning them about people in a similar car allegedly assaulting others. Apparently, I unintentionally threw the packet of frozen brownies at an RA. So one night in college, I went to a friend's dorm room who sold weed, wax, etc. At the time, I was also selling bars, and we often traded and referred clients to each other. Long story short, I trusted this dude and didn't expect anything unusual to happen while hanging out with him. When I got there, I bought some weed, he gave me a few dabs, and we started playing 2K for a bit. After the game, a kid he knew from back home showed up and seemed chill. The kid wanted to buy some wax, and then my friend said, "If you take this entire half-gram dab, you don't have to pay for it." The kid looked nervous. I've been a heavy dabber for years, and I know my lungs can't handle that much. The kid agreed and ripped it like a champ. He cleared the whole half-gram dab, which was also super hot, without barely coughing, immediately looking messed up. I was impressed. After a few minutes, I went to say hi to some friends on a different floor, dapped everyone up, and said I'd be back in about a half hour. Here's where the story takes a turn, for better or worse. I returned to the room to grab my backpack, high and tired, just wanting to go back home. I banged and banged on the door, but no one answered. Finally, my friend opened the door with a terrified expression and said, "Don't come in." I was like, "What's up, bro? Just let me grab my bag." I walked in, which was probably a mistake. The kid who took the dab was having a full-blown panic attack or bad trip, running around swinging his arms. It was insane. I told my friend who lived there that I'd get him some Xanax from the room to calm him down. I knew he was just too high, and going to the hospital would likely result in them giving him something like Xanax anyway. However, saying that out loud was a terrible idea because as soon as I did, the panicked kid froze and stared at me. We all sat there quietly for about 5 minutes while the kid just stared at me like a scared puppy. We got him food, water, and tried to make him comfortable. He still hadn't said anything, and we were just trying to prevent another episode. As we sat there in silence, thinking things were getting better, the panicked kid slowly reached for his phone by his foot. He looked terrified as he put the phone to his ear and said, "Help me, these people are trying to kill me with Xanax. Send the police, I'm in the dorm rooms, help, they're trying to murder me." He actually called the cops on us. My friend who sold weed grabbed the phone and said, "No, we're not. This kid is losing his mind, send an ambulance." At this point, we were more concerned about the situation and that we had sold him drugs. We quickly packed everything into duffel bags. One of the kid's roommates stayed behind to talk to the cops, and we ran down the street with backpacks full of weed. Later, we found out that after we left, the kid ran out of the room, and the cops found him in the lobby screaming and crying. They took him to the hospital, and when I saw him a few days later, he didn't remember any of it. I don't know how no one heard all that commotion, or how we got away with it. Needless to say, we agreed not to sell drugs to that kid anymore. When I got there, I bought some weed, he gave me a few dabs, and we started playing 2K for a bit. After the game, a kid he knew from back home showed up and seemed chill. The kid wanted to buy some wax, and then my friend said, "If you take this entire half-gram dab, you don't have to pay for it." The kid looked nervous. I've been a heavy dabber for years, and I know my lungs can't handle that much. The kid agreed and ripped it like a champ. He cleared the whole half-gram dab, which was also super hot, without barely coughing, immediately looking messed up. I was impressed. A few years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to become a blow dealer. I spent most nights hanging out at bars and knew a few people, but only one sketchy guy could provide me with the kind of supply I needed to get started. Finally, one night I ran into him and convinced him of my poor entrepreneurial idea. We went back to his place after the bar, accompanied by maybe 2 others, drank beers, did blow, and I picked up a half zip. Since I had been drinking all night, he let me crash in his guest room. This guy lived on the outskirts of town and had a few pets, including a pet pig. Little did I know, I would be sharing the room with this swine. I hadn't thought much of it until I woke up to find the bag pulled out of my cargo shorts on the floor, ripped open, and spread all over the wooden floorboards with decent spacing between them, all covered in pig snot. Porky was in the corner, snorting away all jacked up, clearly aware he had done something wrong as he saw how mortified I was at the sight. The product was 80% ruined with barely anything recoverable. Nervously, I woke up my new business partner to show him the tragic event. We almost had bacon for breakfast for 2 different reasons, but thankfully, Porky survived that day and was okay, unlike my business venture. The guy the first used to buy weed from in our apartment complex had a knife pulled on him during a sale in our parking lot once. In response, he pulled out a damn hammer and swung, breaking the guy's wrist. He came upstairs with blood on his hoodie and the hammer, in an absolute panic, rambled a bit, and then went back to his place. The guy he hit drove off instantly, and I'm not sure how much damage that hammer swing did since he didn't hit anything solid. I still don't know why he had a hammer exactly, but I guess it did the job. The same guy got a new roommate a few months later who was dealing something harder. Just found a bag of pills in a toilet, that's all I know. Anyway, they got raided by some kind of SWAT team, and his dog got out. The SWAT team was yelling at the dog and handling his owner roughly with guns aimed everywhere, so the dog started freaking out. I didn't want to see the dog get shot, so I went down there and interrupted them, talked my way into being allowed to try and get the dog. They kept their guns trained roughly on me and the dog, but I managed to coax him to come up to my apartment with me. The dog's name was Roscoe, and we hung out for 6 to 7 hours until my dealer, his owner, showed up. I guess he had posted bail or something. He was the small fry in that raid. He took his dog and moved away shortly after. I was glad the dog didn't get shot, but that was by far the most firepower I've ever had aimed at me. It all seemed pretty overkill, really. I was blacked out drunk one night at a bar with some coworkers, wearing a suit. A colleague introduced me to an older guy and said, "If you want any coke, talk to this guy." So, in my drunken and stupid state, I started chatting with the guy, and he suggested we go out to his car. Without much thought, I agreed and left the bar with him. When we reached his car, he handed me a bag and said, "That's a ball and it's fire." This is when things took a turn for the worse. I told the dealer I needed to use an ATM, and he agreed to drive me to one. However, as soon as I got into the car, he pulled out a gun and ordered me to shut up and give him my debit card. I argued and resisted, but eventually caved in due to the threat of the gun. We drove to the worst part of the city and approached an ATM. He demanded my PIN, and out of fear, I reluctantly gave it to him. He withdrew $300, returned my card, and then swiftly drove out of the parking lot. Shortly after leaving the ATM, he kicked me out of the car. Now, I found myself in a suit, stranded in a dangerous neighborhood at about 1 a.m., with temperatures around 20 degrees. I realized my phone was dead. I tried to seek help at a gas station, asking them to call a taxi, but I was denied, twice. The area I was in was so desolate that there were virtually no businesses or places to turn for assistance. I ended up walking home approximately 8 miles, freezing my ass off. When I finally arrived, I opened the bag only to discover it contained nothing but flour. It was undoubtedly one of the worst nights of my life. In 1986, in a small town south of Baltimore, cocaine and LSD were prevalent. A local dead cover band called the Jello Boys was playing in a field on a local family's farm. The area had numerous barns and sheds scattered around. I ended up in one of the small barns with 2 of my buddies and their coke dealer. This guy was a real tweaker, highly strung. We were standing around an old cable reel that was stood up on its end in the center of the barn. The only light was on the side wall, casting lots of shadows. On the spool was a 24 by 24 framed picture of Motley Crue, like something you'd win from a carnival game, with a piece of glass covering the picture. The dealer pulled out a baggie and dumped what he claimed was more than a quarter ounce of coke onto Vince Neil's face in the picture. He took out his driver's license and began breaking up the bigger rocks to set up lines. Suddenly, he sneezed loudly, twice and fast. From the rafters, a huge pigeon was startled and took off, hitting the rafter directly in front of it and falling straight down onto the makeshift table, flapping its wings wildly. The cocaine scattered everywhere, falling onto the straw-covered barn floor. The dealer grabbed the pigeon and threw it against the wall in a panic when he realized all the coke was gone. He then looked at us and screamed, "Get the fuck out, don't touch anything, just get the fuck out." We exchanged looks and made a hasty exit stage right. I never saw that dude again. Oh, by the way, I was tripping balls. This happened about 30 years ago. My roommate and I were out of weed, bankrupt, so I decided to go to the local commuter train location and quickly bought an eighth of weed for $20. The transaction was very quick, and I barely looked at the bag. I shoved it into my pocket and walked away around the corner. Suddenly, I heard a cop announce himself behind me. I turned around, and there he was in full uniform, shining a flashlight in my face. He told me to pull the bag out of my pocket and give it to him. He unrolled the bag and started laughing. He shouted at me, "This is rose hip tea." Then he told me to get out of there. So, no weed, but also no police hassle. I was weirdly disappointed on one hand that I had no weed, but at the same time relieved that I hadn't been arrested. I think that's the last time I bought anything off the street. I used to buy hash from a dealer who was incredibly sketchy. Despite his seemingly nice demeanor toward me and others who didn't cross him, he had a dark side. He often invited me to smoke a joint with him after selling me hashish, and I usually accepted. Let me tell you a bit more about this guy, Daniel. I knew he'd had run-ins with the police before. Once, he even told me he might go to prison for punching a cop in the face and trying to defend himself with an illegal knife after lighting fireworks at a stadium. Daniel, only 17 at the time, looked like a stereotypical criminal, built like a gangster, white and skinned. He had a softer side that he only showed to friends, but he despised the system and anyone who opposed him. One day, he showed up covered in huge red spots on his jacket, claiming he had taken care of someone the day before. Now, here's what happened one day when I went to buy hash from him. We met in a parking garage on a Sunday, with only one car parked there. We decided to smoke together after the transaction. As we started smoking from a bong, we got incredibly high. Daniel was sitting down and seemed oblivious, which worried me because it made him an easy target if someone came looking for their car. After a few minutes, a woman emerged from the garage. Daniel signaled for me to leave, so I started running. I could hear them talking behind me as I hurried to catch a tram. Sitting on the tram, I witnessed the scene unfold. 2 unmarked police cars, 1 marked car, and 5 officers with shields approached Daniel. I was utterly shocked. Apparently, Daniel had pushed the woman who emerged, causing her to hit her head and be sent to the hospital. The police were wary of Daniel due to his history. They didn't take any chances. That incident made me realize I had been messing around with someone I shouldn't have. I never saw him again after that. I wasn't a drug dealer, but when I worked for the U.S. Forest Service, USFS, in Nevada, one of our crews stumbled upon a massive marijuana grow operation deep in the mountains. This wasn't just a small, amateurish patch where someone casually tossed out a few seeds and wandered away. These individuals had constructed an elaborate setup. They had buried 2 miles of irrigation hose running down from a spring high up on the mountainside. A network of drip lines nourished well over 10,000 marijuana plants, worth approximately $20 million, spread across a small canyon. The main irrigation pipe filled a pond, which had been dug entirely by hand. There was no vehicle track leading back to the grow site. The gardeners had lived nearby, likely just 3 of them. They had fled ahead of law enforcement. Their pots, pans, and personal effects were left under their shared tarp shelter. We even found numerous hand-carved slingshots. I took one as a souvenir, dubbing it my cartel slingshot. According to the DEA agents overseeing the operation, these gardeners endured harsh living conditions. They were probably undocumented immigrants, promised significant returns for camping out in the wilderness and tending the crop. Unfortunately, that promised payday often never materializes, but they aren't in a position to complain. If caught, they face a 10-year federal minimum sentence, yet they rarely inform on their bosses, as they still have families residing in Mexico. Given the remote location and limited law enforcement resources, not even enough DEA agents or county sheriff's deputies, all the USFS field workers were conscripted to eradicate this garden. The experience was surreal. Working alongside a crew of hippies to carry bales of marijuana up the mountainside and load them onto a trailer, all under the watchful gaze of a DEA agent armed with a carbine. The entire ordeal left us smelling like weed for days. Once we had loaded everything onto the trailer, we took a group photo, an impressive haul of around 4,000 pounds of marijuana. I couldn't resist congratulating the head agent, quoting one of my favorite lines from David Simon, "Another glorious victory in the war on drugs." I wasn't a big-time drug dealer, but I dabbled in various substances and was always happy to share what I had. It was a friend's 21st birthday party, and while there was plenty of alcohol, I also had some other stuff that I shared with those interested. We did a couple of bumps of coke and then returned to the party. Later on, we went back into the bedroom, and I laid out big fat lines for anyone who wanted them. There was a girl with her boyfriend, and she had never tried any drugs, not even pot. We all did our lines, and then the boyfriend asked what the coke was cut with. I confidently reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. However, after a minute or so, I realized my mistake. Instead of the coke, I had accidentally dumped out a bag of ketamine, and suddenly everyone in the room was completely gone, experiencing a K-hole. The boyfriend, unable to move due to the ketamine, threatened to kick my ass once he regained mobility. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, I knew I had to get out of there immediately. I swore it was an honest mistake, which it was, but they were convinced I had maliciously tried to get them as messed up as possible because I was some kind of evil, twisted individual. I ran out of there as fast as I could, only to be tackled by a friend of the boyfriend at the bottom of the stairs. Fortunately, my close friend, who had also taken a line of ketamine thinking it was cocaine, intervened and pulled the guy off me while I made my escape. It was far from my finest moment, especially since the police showed up shortly after I left. Miraculously, my friend whose birthday it was managed to send them away. It was a complete disaster, but somehow things turned out okay in the end. Nevertheless, I deeply regret inadvertently giving a drug-naive girl a fat line of ketamine for her first illicit drug experience. I never found out what happened to her, but if anything, I hope it was a wake-up call.